Everybody got a handout this morning? Just want to make sure. Dave, did I leave one there for you? You got a handout? Yep, you're good. Okay. Well, good morning. Welcome back to week 4, part 4. Today is the study of the temple, the building, part of the building project. We're looking at Solomon the builder. We've already talked about him as a man. And we're looking at the kingdom of Israel. And we've done the overview of Solomon's life. And last week we discussed the kingdoms, its borders, its administration, its trading partners, and even some of its allies. And today we're going to dig into the building program, which really was, in my mind, was Solomon's legacy. Okay? It was his legacy as a king. It was really what God raised him up for, and it was what his father David had prepared him for, and what the kingdom supported him in his endeavor. Even if it was begrudgingly, they still supported him. So not only are we going to be looking at the temple today, but we're going to look at his palace and his palace complex and numerous other building projects that he accomplished as well, if we have time. If not, we'll kind of push it into next week. There's not an extreme amount of material to coverage, but I still want to be able to do it. So in your handouts today, you've got not only got an outline, but you've also got two pictures. One is of the palace/temple complex. That's the bigger one. And then the smaller one is of the temple, which we'll get into a little bit later on and be able to kind of understand. And then we're going to take a visual journey through the temple and look at that. So we're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 5. Specifically, we're going to start with verses 13 to 18. Then we bounce around a little bit, but it's on your outline. Again, for those of you watching online, if you need a copy of the outline or would like a copy of the outline or these pictures that we're using, email me at info@warrentonchristian.org. INFO, info@warrentonchristian.org, and we'll be glad to get those to you. So now Solomon has begun the process of gathering all of his materials. That's been in the first few years. Good morning, Ginger. The first few years of his kind of getting going in the kingdom and handling things. David had gathered a ton of material ahead of time, but Solomon has begun to gather these materials. He's secured a supplier for his materials. That's Hiram up in Phoenicia. Remember, we talked about that last week. Now it's time to gather a workforce that was going to be capable of handling the project that he was about to begin. And what better place to start getting a workforce than by conscripting your own people, right? When you start right there within it. Now, let me give you a picture, okay? The biggest workforce that I've ever dealt with has probably been about 50 or 60 people, like all together at one time, where I've overseen these 50 or 60 people. I cannot even imagine what the process was, and here's why. Solomon drafted 30,000 men into the workforce. Basically said, you're hired, you're hired, you're hired, you're hired, you're hired, you're hired, right? And he sent them off to Phoenicia with Hiram to start cutting down these trees and start making timbers for the temple. Now, here's the way it would work. He wouldn't send all 30,000 guys at a time. He would send 10,000. 10,000 men, you're going to go for the month of June. Okay? When July 1st hits, you come home and another 10,000 is going to go. So there was 20,000 at home and 10,000 abroad while this was going on. Okay? He also enlisted, on top of this workforce that went out of town, he enlisted 70,000 carriers. Men to be carriers. That's all they did was they carried stone, they carried rock, they carried mortar, they carried whatever they needed to, dirt. He had 80,000 stone cutters on top of that, and he had 3,300 foremen. How'd you like to handle that workforce, Jim? 3,300 foremen. Hey, we're going to have a Zoom meeting today. To give you some idea of this workforce, it is estimated at this time there were in excess of 4 million people in Israel. Okay? Basically, 1 out of every 4 men worked on the temple in some way or another. 1 out of 4 worked on the temple in Israel. Now, there is a little over 6 million people in the state of Missouri. Now remember, the 4 million people in Israel was the men that were working. Okay? That kind of gives you an idea of the size and the scope and the amount of people. It's hard for us sometimes, I think, to figure that many people. It's just crazy. Let me put it in terms maybe that makes more sense to us. Let's put it in U.S. terms. The Hoover Dam was built at the height of the Great Depression between 1931 and 1936. During this time, there were approximately 21,000 people employed to build Hoover Dam. Okay? That's only the 20,000 that stayed home of the men. That's not the 70,000 carriers or the 80,000 cutters. Okay? Give you an idea. 21,000 people were employed to make that project become a reality. The lowest paid job, this was interesting, this is just kind of fun facts. The lowest paid job, you ready? On the Hoover Dam, 50 cents an hour. Yeah, but that's okay. The top guy only made $1.25 an hour. Okay, the average employee working on Hoover Dam made 62.5 cents per hour. The cost of the dam, $49 million. Okay? If you were to change that to today's dollars, $760 million. I didn't figure that one out. I should have done that to figure that out. I'm going to get, if I just had to guess, you would probably be on the average $40 to $45 an hour. I'm just guessing on an average there. Which I think is interesting because back then it really was a 62.5 cents an hour is what the person got paid. But now when you say, okay, yeah, I make $30 an hour, well, that's what you make, but that's not what the cost of you really is, because you have to add the additional 8% governmental taxes on top of that, plus any benefits that you're getting. So that number's always really skewed. Anyway, not to get off target, but I just thought it was interesting to kind of give us a picture in our head. Holy smokes, this was kind of a huge, ginormous undertaking that he went on. Okay? So that kind of gives us an idea of the workforce that Solomon was working with. And when we kind of see what he was doing, we're going to understand why that workforce needed to happen. Okay? Solomon chose the site for the temple that was most revered by the nation of Israel. In 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1. You changed seats on me, Mary. I was ready for you. That's okay. 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1 is where it points out where where Solomon built the temple. And that was Mount Moriah, and it was the place that God had appeared to David, and very possibly, and what the Jews believe, is the place that Abraham took Isaac up to sacrifice him when the angel of the Lord stopped him because of his faithfulness. That's Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah, today you cannot see that rock because it's under the dome. Okay? Now, when Solomon built his temple, he did the same thing. There was a large flat rock outcropping that, like I said, is now under the dome in Jerusalem. At the time of Solomon and David, this was an undeveloped area. But Solomon laid the foundation with dressed stones, some of which were 15 feet in length and can still be seen today in Jerusalem. And not only did he build the temple here, but he extended the walls of the city of Jerusalem around it to protect it and to make it a part of the city as well. So if you look in your handout, you'll see this map. And so what you need to understand is that this kind of, I don't know what the hexagonal shape underneath of here, underneath of this temple court, that's actually would have been about where the rock was. Okay? It kind of was taller. And you'll see in some of the videos today that we're going to show in just a little bit, you'll kind of get a picture of that as well. But that rock was right in that general area. And so what he did was, not only did he build these walls up around here, but he also built the floor all up so that it would be level with the top of that rock. And then his foundation went in as he worked along. Okay? Have you ever been to Israel? No. I want to go so bad I can taste it. But not right now. I'll wait a bit. All right, so let's talk about the outside. And we get our scripture from that back in 1 Kings chapter 6 is where we're going to pick up and kind of follow through with that now. Solomon laid out the plans for God's temple. and he followed the proportions of the tent of meeting that had been used since Moses had it constructed at Mount Sinai. All right? And we're going to do some visuals in here to help you guys as well. The tent of meeting was 90 feet long. The new temple was going to be the same. It was going to be 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Okay? So, let me give you an idea. 90 feet is from the back wall here to where we go through the second set of doors into the fellowship area. Okay? That's your 90 feet. Okay? 30. This is the temple.
And it's not the outer courts or whatever this is.
No, this is just the temple. Yeah. So when you look at this, yeah, it's not this big wall out here. It's this actual wall of the temple itself. Okay. Actually, let me do this. These are the walls that we're going to talk about in our distance. Okay. Kind of give you an idea. So it was 90 feet. It was 30 feet wide. This building is 60 feet wide, so it would have been approximately half as wide. 90 feet long, half as wide. Okay? We're 22 feet tall to the center peak up here. His temple would have been 45. So it would have been twice as tall as the space that we're sitting in. Okay? Just to kind of give you a visual idea. Now, the covered walkway which surrounded the temple was 120 feet long and 90 feet wide. All right, would have been basically the length of our building and our building plus 30 more feet. Our building's 60 feet wide, so it would have been the building plus 30 more feet. So that's the area that would have been around the temple, okay? So when you look at...
You said that was 90 by 120?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 90 by 120. And that would have been this area here that goes all the way around on the outside. No, it would have. No, you'll see it in the video. When I show you the video, you'll get a better feel for that. But there was a covered area that went all the way around it. Okay. Now, the exterior walls of the temple would have been of dressed stone from the foundation to the roof. So it would have been a stone building all the way on the outside. And the stone that they quarried was white, pure white. It wasn't like the gray marble that we see, or the gray marble. Ain't no marble in Missouri. There is, but we mostly see limestone. It's not the gray limestone. It's a white stone. In fact, they say that the Temple Mount was so brilliantly white that you could see it when you approached Jerusalem from certain directions, because it was there. It was just this white building on top of the hill there. Okay. Now, on the inside of the temple, Solomon made, as he built it and went up high, up near the top, he made these narrow, what's called a clerestory window along the tops of the walls. Clerestory window is designed to let the air in and no moisture. Okay, so it's a tall, thin thing. He built inner rooms against the walls of the main hall, reaching up 3 stories. The lower rooms were 7.5 feet wide. The second floor rooms were 9 feet wide, and the third floor rooms were 10.5 feet wide. So when you came into this building, you kind of came up like this on the inside. You were wider at the bottom, and then a little narrower, and then a little narrower. Then it went up, and that's where your windows were. Okay? In the rear of the temple, Solomon partitioned off a room 30 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 30 feet tall. Okay? So 30 feet is from the back of the building to about halfway between these 2 posts. So that's 30 feet. And so that would have been this room here. All right? And it was raised up off the ground. And it was the most holy place for the Ark of the Covenant. And there were 12 steps leading up to it. Okay? The remainder of the 60 feet of the temple and the holy place were all covered with cedar from floor to ceiling. Then it was carved with gourds and flowers, and then it was covered in hammered gold. And again, we'll see in these videos, you'll kind of get a good feel for this, and we'll talk about this. Now, Solomon set his standards really high for the craftsmen who were to build God's temple. I really shouldn't say Solomon did, God did. God said, here's what I want you to do. For example, can you imagine a job site that allows no hammer, no chisel, or any iron tool of any kind on site? I'm in trouble because I'm a carpenter. I use a hammer for everything, whether it's designed for that or not. We use it for that, right? Yeah, I'm thinking, man, I'd be in trouble. It meant that all of the stone that was cut from the quarry, it had to be dressed and cleaned up. In other words, it was cut to fit for fitting at the temple. There would be no adjustment to that stone once it was on the construction site, so everything had to be planned perfect and was no doubt extremely time consuming.
Was it chisel or how did they cut it?
They cut it at the quarry. It's just when you got to the job site, you couldn't cut it. It had to fit perfectly. So yeah, they used, all those iron tools were used at the quarry. That's where all the noise was. So, for instance, somebody's building a house, okay? You get a, I always think of it like this. How many of you have lived in a neighborhood and at 6 o'clock in the morning on the summer, or 5 in the morning, you hear, it's your neighbor getting a new roof, right? You wouldn't have heard that. You wouldn't have, there would have been no sounds at the site. I mean, obviously normal, but there would have been no hammering, no nailing, no beating, none of that stuff. I know. It makes it really hard to think. Now, there are companies today that do that same process. You build a log home, for instance, they prefab it completely so that when it shows up on your site, all you do is log A, log B, drive a pin, log C, drive a pin, log D. It's all pre-fit and ready to go. Now, there are always some adjustments that need to be made, but that's as closest picture we can get of what that would have been like. And to me, as a builder and as a carpenter, I'm like, I've worked with enough architectural plans and engineers' plans to know that even the guys who sit and plan it out, you get to the job site and something doesn't fit or something has to be changed or something's not quite right, you have to make an adjustment. I don't know how they did that. But it's fascinating to me to realize that on the site that was it. There was nothing going on. Okay? The time frame, and as I said, it was very time consuming. The building of the temple was a major undertaking for Solomon and for the Israelites. Considering that he laid his foundation in the 4th year of his rule, and he didn't complete his temple until the 11th year. Okay? So this is the complex, but it took him 7 years just to do the temple and the wall surrounding, the outer court. 7 years. So he gets that much done, right? And then he stops and starts building everything else, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But I want to finish up with the temple here. He had brass furnishings throughout. Solomon sent for a guy by the name of Huram. He was a bronze craftsman from Tyre. God was the one that said, hey, this is the guy I want you to bring in to do this job. He brought him to Jerusalem to begin work on the furnishings for the temple. And he cast 2 bronze pillars. Now, he's got a 2-story house that got big pillars on the front. Those are kind of cool, right? All right. Think about this. Each of these bronze pillars was 27 feet tall and had a circumference of 18 feet, or a diameter roughly of 5.75 feet. Joe is about 5.55, so it would have been a little wider than Joe is tall, just to give you an idea. On the top of each pillar sat a capital, which was a design that had all the really cool scroll-looking things, and it was square. It went from round to square. It was 7.5 feet tall. So now you're 34.5 feet tall with these pillars. The pillars stood at the entrance to the temple, and as you ascended the 12 steps from the sacrificing area to go into the temple, these pillars were on each side. Okay? And Solomon named them. Actually, Huram named them. And it says on your smaller thing here, he's got their names there. One is Boaz and one is Jachin. Now, I didn't do the research. I had planned this and just didn't get that far to find out, why did he pick Boaz and Jachin? Is there a specific name behind that? Does it mean something? So hopefully I'll try and have that information for us for next week. But I found that interesting. Okay? There were also elaborate and ornate decorations on each pillar and on each capital. Hiram also fashioned what they called the sea, S-E-A. And it was a large bowl-shaped vessel measuring 15 feet across. The bowl was 15 feet across, okay? It could hold 11,500 gallons of water. That's why they needed 70,000 carriers. Yeah.
So in other words, all these millions of people working on this, most of their job was to be lifting and carrying?
Mhm.
Wow,
Yeah,
because they had no equipment.
right.
Wow.
Well, and I mean, I'm sure they use typical, what do they call that? When you use like block and tackle and things like that. I always call it, what Joey always says, it's work smarter, not harder. He's always dreaming something like that up.
Well, I guess like with pulleys?
Yeah, pulleys and stuff like that. I'm sure they use those types of things.
Wow.
So that was happening. The sea, this big bowl, it was supported by 12 bronze bulls. And these bulls, there was 3 facing out on each side, okay? They were also, in addition to that, there were 10 movable stands that are on wheels that were made from bronze. Each of these was 6 foot by 6 foot and about 4.5 foot deep. And these were for transporting water from various areas for purification. And when we watch this video in just a couple minutes here, you're going to see they have pictures of these with the big sea in front next to the sacrifice area, and then you'll see these little water things, the movable stands down 5 down each side of the temple in those areas. It's very amazing to me. The size is what blows my mind. I'm like, what do you do with a 6 by 6 foot, 4.5 foot deep bowl? How do you empty? You don't you don't do that. I mean, you don't. In my head, I'm like, it's bronze. You don't even get a bunch of guys and go, let's pick up one side and we'll dump it that way. It just blows my mind, okay? Siphoning, that's probably. So Solomon had a lot of things that were made of gold for the temple. The most holy place in the temple was completely covered in gold. Now, that would have been the area that the priests were allowed to go into, that first place, the most holy, okay? And then the Holy of Holies was covered in pure gold, and there were also 2 large cherubim. Each stood 15 feet tall with wingspans of 15 feet, okay? So when you see this video, you'll see that, and the Bible describes it, when they stood, this wingtip out here touched this wall, this wingtip touched the next cherubim over here, and this wingtip touched the outer wall. Okay? And I think most pictures that you see actually show them with the wings. Whoa. Oh, forgot about that, Jeremy. Shouldn't do that. With the wings actually like this and their head down and touching together. But irregardless, they were huge statues, okay? They were completely covered in gold. The altar upon which the Ark of the Covenant rested was made, it wasn't just covered in gold, it was made of pure gold, okay? Not just the outer layer. And then in the main area, the Holy of Holies, there were these 10 lampstands of gold that had all these amazing ornate carvings of flowers. And then there were pure gold basins, there were sprinkling bowls, there were dishes, there were censers, there were tables out there for the bread on. It's pretty amazing. I want to stop right here. And Jeremy, if we can, and Bill, we'll get ready. I want to go through these videos. I want to play the outside video first. And if we have to do it a second time so we make sure that we see everything that we want to see, we can. Actually, yeah, let's go ahead. There's no sound with these. So there you can see the big giant sea on the left. This would have been the sacrifice, where they did the sacrificing. There's your little water things that they would wheel around. And then there is your 2 columns that were made of brass. There's the 11,000 gallon bowl. That kind of gives you a kind of a crazy idea, but a picture of what it would have been. And then you can also see on the background there, you can see what they called that covered porch that they talked about that went around it. Okay? Everybody get a good chance to see that? You want to see it again? Go ahead and run it again, Bill. Yeah.
Now, what did they do
right there. That's where they would have slaughtered the animals and put them on that thing that's burning there. That would have been the sacrificial altar. Oops, we glitched. Oh.
What were all those used for? All the little ones?
The little ones were for purification, cleaning. It's just amazing to me to think of the size and the scope. So you're seeing a building that's 30 feet wide. That's the center part. Between the two posts is 30 feet wide. And then he had his rooms on the side of that. Okay?
So did you get the idea that they filled the little containers from the great big?
No, the little containers were kept separate. They had to do with the washing and you know, like when people came into the temple, kind of like the Catholics do, you dip your, you know, you don't cleanse, but that's what the whole idea behind that
The
is.
smaller parts were not refilled from the large.
No, no, yeah. I mean, maybe they do, but it doesn't really give us any indication of that. All right, Bill, let's go ahead and go.
So just
No, go ahead.
the way it's looked, those pillars that are all, you know, the pillars all the way around the temple, there's like a, is that what you meant, like?
These little rooms.
There's
Yeah.
a little part back, but there's still a wall behind all those
Yes,
pillars.
yes. There's still a wall behind all those pillars. Bill, I got an idea here. I should have thought of this earlier. I got to just find the right button and we'll all be happy. If I don't, Bill will shoot me. There it is. Okay, so yeah, this outer wall, so there's your 30 feet from this wall to this wall would have been the temple. These were your storage rooms that go around the outside of it. And then this is your covered porch area that ran all the way around. It was on all four sides. So when you look at, if you look at let me start with this one. So on this sheet, this is the inner part of the temple, would have been the 30 by 90. And then these would have been the rooms that he put all the way around them, okay? And then that outer wall that you're seeing, that wall right there, and the one back behind it here with the corner piece, that would have been this outer wall here, all the way around it, that actually enclosed the outer court, okay? Like I said, it's just fascinating to me as I get into this and begin to go, wow.
And I was thinking that in this area, only the priests could enter this area, is that right?
Correct. Through these doors were only the priests.
Well, I meant even on the outside part there.
Here? No. The men were allowed in the outer court.
Okay, so that is the outside.
This is the outer court here. This would have been the sacrificial fire right here, where they would have burnt their offerings. And then this would have been the, how do they call it, the sea of,
Court was for anybody else.
yeah. Yeah,
The temple court was just for the men,
correct.
and the outer court was for the women.
Right,
Okay, now that.
yeah.
Colonnades were very popular then. Even if you take a look at Herod's temple, there was a large colonnade area.
Yes.
It served a couple of purposes. You could have meetings and you could stay in the shade. It's very hot there.
Yes. So Jim's talking about the colonnades. For those of you watching online, he's talking about the colonnades that go all the way around that kind of what we would call a covered porch, basically. Okay. Now,
I can see the, on the other side of the walls,
oh, like back out here? Yes. Okay. So what you're seeing is the outer, what would have been called the outer court out here, which is where the women and the Gentiles were allowed. Okay? Now, there's a huge, I don't say huge, you can find a lot of argument online in the informational section about, well, how do we know this is what Solomon's temple looked like? Okay? And here's what most scholars base this design on, and they say, first of all, it's a biblical description from a visual standpoint. Secondly is they have found numerous temples and areas like this, temple courts, that are designed, not with the same dimensions, but they're designed very similar to this in Phoenicia. Where did all the craftsmen come? Phoenicia, right? That would have been their style of building. That would have been how they built. And I always say it's like this, okay? When you drive through the city of St. Louis and you get down on the hill, all of the buildings look a little bit kind of similar to things over in Italy, right? But if you go down into Dogtown, oh, everything looks a little bit like they would have built it in Germany. So whatever the craftsmen, what their background would have been, typically is how you're going to see that feel or get that feel in that, okay? And so that's why most scholars, they won't argue over this, because they'll say, listen, this was the design. We can't prove Solomon's because there are no remnants of it. You can't find it, but we can prove that it was similar in Phoenicia. Okay, does that make sense to everybody?
But now, it has been a number of years since I've actually read the description of the temple, but if I remember correctly, I thought there was tons of ornamentation. I thought there was a ton of ornamentation
On the inside.
not on the outside.
No, the only outside ornamentation was on the two pillars going in, and then the C's of bronze
Wow.
were the only.
Figured, envision something much more elaborate,
Yeah.
ornate, and
Now, when you go to Herod's temple, the temple that Herod rebuilt, a whole different picture you're going to get there. Dimensions and things, everything just gets blown up and exaggerated. And Herod was huge on, I want everything over the top. So you'll see that. All right, Bill, let's go to the inside. Let's take a tour of the inside. So this would have been the inside. There's your lampstands. There were 10 lampstands that ran down the side. And then you can see all of this ornate different things going on there. Each of the lampstands had all of these almond buds on them that they talked about. Now you're looking up. This would have been the entrance to the Holy of Holies. Even the stairs were covered in gold. And what I was telling you was, notice this is the line between the stairs and the floor. The floor is covered in gold, and it reflects the walls. So there's your stairs going up to your Holy of Holies, and everything would have had massive decorations that meant something to them. There's where they burned their incense. And I don't remember, there's another picture showing the lampstands. I don't remember if he shows if he actually goes into the Holy of Holies. I can't remember. Unless we tie a rope around you, Aaron, then we'd be okay. That's it? Okay. So he didn't give us a picture of the inside of the Holy of Holies. But that gives you an idea just from the gold. And then when you look at, there's the clerestory windows that we talked about way up top. And the only light in there would have been these lampstands. And as I was saying, the reflection would have been incredible. This is obviously, there's your floor line right there. And you can see the reflection of everything on the floor. Yeah, pretty amazing. All right, questions or discussion on that? Okay, I think what I want to do, I don't want to get into this next little section. Well, yeah, we can make this. There's not that much to cover, honestly. So we've talked about the temple. Really, the rest of the building that Solomon did, and I love this particular sheet because this gives you a better picture. You know, in my notes, I just said, okay, Solomon builds the palace. Well, I should say Solomon builds the palace complex, because it's not just a palace that he builds, okay? And I also noted here that he built the temple first, followed immediately by his palace. Then he went back and started working on all of the furnishings that we spoke about, and then the furnishings for his palace, which was just as ornate as what we saw in the temple. And then we also note that the dedication of the temple did not take place until after his palace complex was finished. Now, at first I thought, well, that's kind of weird. You finish the temple, let the Lord have his temple. But then I realized, think about sometimes you ever seen they go in and they're going to build this big new complex, and they get the first building done. They don't always open that building up because then you have to go through all of the construction traffic. In this sense, they were building the rest of this complex here that we're looking at. The people would have had to go through all of this construction to get to the temple. So now I'm like, okay, maybe he wasn't as selfish as I thought he was, or his wives weren't nagging him as bad as I thought he was. When are you going to get my palace finished? But you'll notice that that by the time this was completely done, then when the people came, it would have made maybe a little bit more sense to it. Okay.
Have started the construction of the palace until after the construction of the temple was complete.
He's working his way out, right?
So why would there be palace construction to have to pass through if he didn't start the construction of the palace until after the temple was completed?
Who knows? Maybe it was like, I'm going to lay all the foundations, then I'll come back and do I don't know. It's hard. That's a good point, though. But Solomon's palace, which was known as the House of the Forest of Lebanon, it measured 150 feet in length. It was 75 feet wide and 45 feet tall. Again, that's almost the dimensions of our building. We're 160 long, we're 60 wide, we're 22 and a half feet tall, so it would have been even taller. The colonnade, which was known as the Hall of Pillars, or Pillar Hall, which would have been this area, okay? It was 75 feet long and 45 feet wide, and in front of that colonnade stood the portico, or the porch. So this entire complex, you have this House of the Forest of Lebanon, you have the Pillar Hall, you have the throne room, and then the actual palace out here, and interestingly enough, you'll notice the house of Pharaoh's daughter. She had her own separate dwelling versus all the other wives. The palace foundation was a dressed stone, just like we talked about for the temple. The walls of the palace, the colonnade, the portico, the great courtyard were all of that stone that was cut, trimmed, sawed on the inner and the outer sides, and then brought to the site and put together. The roof beams, there were 45 roof beams that held up the palace roof. Okay? They were of trimmed cedar as well as the roof. And the palace must have been more elaborate than the Bible kind of tells us, because it took Solomon 13 years to do his palace complex. Now, yes, that's a lot more buildings.
Was all of the cutting and everything done?
They don't, nowhere does it say that. So I kind of get the impression that it was just the temple site where they couldn't do anything on site. That his palace, they could do fitting and things like that. And so maybe that was another reason to not dedicate the temple ahead of time, because you don't have this noise right next door of me building my palace. Again, I'm just kind of thinking that through as we go. I'm going to stop there for today. You need to also understand, and there was a couple other pictures that I found, and I didn't bring them with me today because they were good, but I was like, that's more conjecture than it is anything else. But this entire area was undeveloped. So Solomon actually built all of these walls, and you can see it says ancient wall on parts of these, and then it says the present wall, which if you look at a modern day picture of the temple, these are the present walls that you'll see. And that dome, and that's what that six-shaped or eight-sided, that hexagon, that's the dome, the Muslim temple that sits there now is in that space. That's why they show it on there, so you have an idea in your head. But this entire area was undeveloped. So Solomon developed that entire area and walled it in to protect it at the same time as all of this construction was going on. That Solomon was an amazing builder, there's no doubt about that. Again, what his legacy was, I just find it really, really sad that within 100 years after Solomon's done with this, it's going to be literally taken down stone by stone. And they went in there and set fires to melt the gold off the sides of the walls into lumps so they could carry it off and then tear it down stone by stone.
That happened within 100 years?
I believe it was 100 years, yeah.
I didn't realize it happened that soon after construction.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd have to look at the exact timeline on it, but I believe it was within 100, because they were all, shortly thereafter, you went through king, and then they were all being attacked and overtaken. It may have been 150, somewhere in that 100 to 150 years, but that's still not very long for a structure like that to sit and be absolutely obliterated, to the point that a lot of what we're doing to figure out what it looks like is conjecture based on things around us.
Didn't it kind of surprise you that the Lord allowed that to happen after he wanted it so specifically done?
Yes and no. I'm more surprised that he let Herod build a new one. Yeah. Well, to a point. God still won. He took care of him in the end. I mean, it's just,
Gained a lot of favor with the Israelites
right,
because of that.
right. And they felt they were owed. He was owed that, you know.
I've got a theory
Yeah.
on the two bronze pillars,
Okay.
and this is just me thinking out loud, basically, no facts. I think it's because you've got two, at that time period, two of the best foretellings of Jesus Christ in Joshua, and Boaz. Boaz was the kinsman redeemer, and the kinsman redeemer is the best model we have of foretelling of Jesus Christ.
Okay, that's great. I want to say this so that they hear this online. Jim pointed out that his theory on the two pillars was that Boaz, that two pillars, because they were pointed towards, they were two of the biggest pointers towards Jesus coming, the Messiah. Number one, Boaz, who was a kinsman redeemer, perfect picture of Jesus, right? And you said Joshua was the other one?
Right.
And that'd be great to find out if
It's
that's,
also noted under my Bible, I just looked at one of them, but they believe that the name meant something. Like
okay.
the name,
So there was a meaning to that name that was something specific. Okay.
like I think, was it Joykin? Was it
Yeah.
one of them?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah.
Something about strength. In his strength
Okay.
is what the name, that is what they believed it meant. So
Okay.
I'm assuming the other
It's just interesting that, that it was like, yeah, you can't find a whole lot of information on that. And it doesn't tell you in the scripture. It gives you a great description of the columns, the two pillars, but it doesn't go, here's why we did that. I mean, some of the other stuff you can see and understand. So,
That's one thing that we neglect to talk about a lot, but when I was going to school, we talked about it quite often, was the kinsman redeemer. And the importance
yeah.
that played.
And it plays an important part not only to them back then, but it should, if we understood it a little bit better, it would play a huge role in our society today of people understanding that, hey, if my brother passes away, I need to make sure that my sister-in-law is taken care of. Not just, well, that's not part of my family, so, I mean, that's a huge thing. You're right.
Well, he paid the debt.
Paid the debt, exactly. It was done, it was taken care of. And we see that a lot in and around that time period, better pictures of that. So,
Just like Jesus paid our sin.
yes.
And I think to maybe what Steph was talking about, I couldn't hear everything she was saying just earlier, but the temple and everything was built, and it had to be wonderful to see and everything, and I'm sure word got around. But the whole concept of that there were the blessings and the curses that God had spoken a long time back were
Yes.
If they obeyed him, they would be blessed. If they didn't, they would be cursed. And I think part of that cursing of their disobedience over and over and moving farther away from him was their destruction as a people from the two different empires at two different times, the Babylonians and Assyrians.
Yeah. To stand by almost and watch that temple destroyed, and or to come back and realize what it must have been like and to see it destroyed. I almost think more of it would have, to me, would have been more impactful to a Jew in 70 AD when Herod's temple was destroyed, because a lot of the Jews after Solomon, when the first temple was destroyed, a lot of the Jews had already gone to different lands. They didn't see it. It was their next generation or 2 generations or 3 generations later that were going to come back and go, oh, this is where the walls used to be. They didn't know that because they'd never seen it. They didn't know any different. But the
Imagine the number of people they had to have take down Solomon's temple,
I know,
you know, and they were probably Jewish.
more than likely they conscripted labor and to tear. And it wasn't just the temple. You know, we saw those videos. It was all the walls around the temple. It was the palace complex. It was all of that. It wasn't just, oh, they're going to take down one building. They're taking down, you know, an entire city block and then some.
And the only thing I could figure is beyond the valuable things that would have been inside the temple was the fact of, like, the Babylonian, was it the Babylonians that destroyed the southern kingdom? Is that right?
Okay, I can't
it's
remember.
the-
It's the Assyrians, because yeah,
Assyrians. But would have been how the goal was to destroy culture, integrate people.
right.
You know, that, you know, in a couple generations, this is not going to be,
Right. They won't know anything about it. They won't know anything about it.
become us.
Exactly. All right, we better stop there. You guys have been great. Look forward to next week. We'll pick it back up, and we're going to be talking about, what are we talking about? We're probably going to move to the dedication of the temple next week. So that's another good, great study.